What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to yet another Sales Hacker webinar. Today I'm joined with Miles and Malcolm, and we're going to be diving into actionable tips for selling into challenging niche markets. This is a very, very difficult challenge to overcome for a lot of salespeople out there because let's face it, not everybody is in software and SaaS, and even if they are, that doesn't necessarily mean that your prospects are hanging out all day on LinkedIn just waiting for you to talk to them. Some of them are doctors, some of them are lawyers, some are maybe in some crazy industries such as Miles. He's in the shipping. To be more specific, he's in the water. How would you?
Maritime shipping and logistics. That's right.
Maritime shipping and logistics. So I can almost guarantee you that without even knowing much about Miles's business, that maritime shipping and logistics prospects are definitely not sitting on LinkedIn all day arguing with you about cold calling versus social selling. That's for damn sure. So, and I think we have two experts here on the webinar for you. Malcolm also sells into an extremely difficult market. He's selling to lawyers who are very, very busy. It's an archaic dinosaur world where they're not willing to change. So both of these guys are going to be able to give you phenomenal insight into what it takes to break through to these hard to reach prospects. And then once you finally break through to them, how do you position value? How do you communicate the future state to where they currently are? How do you paint the picture of the problem that they have and position your product or service as the right choice for them? So without further ado, we're going to get right into it. And before I introduce these gentlemen a bit further, just 5 quick points on the agenda. We'll be going into how to understand the niche industry and market that you're trying to break into or that you are breaking into, but just need to do it more effectively or efficiently. Generating leads and demand in an analog world. So as you heard me mention, a lot of these prospects are living in the dinosaur archaic times, and generating leads and demand in these industries is very difficult. And these two gentlemen right here have expert insight on how to create demand, not just capture demand that may be already there. They'll show you some ways to get that going. Creating the burning platform and demonstrating solution. That sounds mysterious and intriguing. Solution value, that sounds mysterious and intriguing. And I would love for these fine folks to break that down for you, which they will do soon. Helping the niche buyer overcome fear of change. As we said, a lot of these people are deathly afraid of change, and communicating that change is good. Change means more efficiency, more productivity, more revenue. That's what Malcolm and Miles will break down for you. And of course, the final stage of it is incorporating empathy and transparency to produce results. So ultimately, you got to be able to step into the mindset of these buyers that you're prospecting into. And only if you speak their language, only if you're empathetic to their specific business problems, will you be able to be viewed as a trusted consultant and kind of working a consultative angle rather than just, hey, you should buy from me because we have the lowest price or just the most readily available product for you. So without further delay, Malcolm Smith, welcome to the webinar. I'll give you a moment to kind of talk about who you are, what you do, and what brought you to this Sales Hacker webinar.
Absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to be a part of this. I think it's a phenomenal topic and really excited to kind of share my knowledge. I've been in the industry now, SaaS, for about 2 years. I came from retail, was working for AT&T for a while. I just fell in love with SDR, fell in love with top of funnel prospecting. So I'm running a really championship team of sales development reps right now in New York City for Leap Legal Software, and we do have a pretty challenging market. We are basically trying to sell SaaS software to attorneys, so it's challenging, but it's definitely rewarding. And I think I can bring some of that knowledge to the sales hacker community and kind of give some insights and tips on how to function in more challenging markets.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, and I've had a chance to come down and meet you,
yes,
and the Leap team down in New York City. You guys are doing some phenomenal work.
We're trying.
There was this story of one rep who had an astonishing, I think, 47 touch points with a prospect before it closed, which, talk about persistence and success story for sales, man. It just doesn't get better than that.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. You got a great team down there, Malcolm. Cool. So let's pass it over to Miles, a good friend of mine who I've known for so many years. We finally have now we live in the same area. We both live in Miami, Florida, and we still have not got a chance to hang out just because we've been so busy. But it's all good because we're running companies here. But Miles, why don't you take it away, brother?
Sure. Thank you, Gaetano. Honored to be here and to be actually on my first webinar. For Sales Hacker, it's an honor to be on here with you and Malcolm and to kind of share some of the knowledge that I've gained over the last couple of years working at Octopi. To kind of give you a little more background, to give you and the viewers a little more background on my own background. I used to be a financial advisor. I hated it. It wasn't for me. Found that I did have a passion for people, right? So I started, finally broke out of the financial world. Started working for a Miami tech startup called Live Ninja, where it was my first sort of foray into tech. A couple of years later, we raised about $7 million, both in seed and venture capital from Comcast City. We did a crowd raise from some seed investors, which was pretty cool. I was the first sales hire, business development hire there, and that company actually got acquired. After learning so much there, I kind of figured out where I needed to go. And I ended up at Octopi. And we're a maritime shipping and logistics startup, bootstrapping, and all of our deals are 5-year enterprise deals. And we've been fortunate enough in under 2 years to have 7 clients in 6 countries, across 4 continents. So a lot of travel, as you guys know, but, learning along the way and happy to impart some of the experience and wisdom I've gained so far in my journey.
Awesome. That's really exciting. You have a great story. And, I'm just really pumped to get through to the juicy stuff here. So you guys already know enough about me. I don't really have to tell you that much. I've done some marketing work for some great brands, most notably Sales Hacker and Outreach, and now I'm running demand generation at nextiva.com. So that's pretty much enough about me. Let's get into the good stuff. So how much do you really need to know about your customer? Let's pass this off to Malcolm and get it started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's one of the most crucial things, right? Like you need to really understand the industry you're selling into. And of course that's true for all sales, but I think it's more true for the more challenging markets. Like you need to understand not only the challenges, what keeps them up at night, but you need to be abreast of what's going to be keeping them up at night. Like when you're calling and speaking to these people, they don't have the time to hear, well, here's some of the issues you may be experiencing. They want to hear, here's what you're going to be experiencing in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months down the track. And I think it's so important to just understand the vernacular that the clients are using, the cloud prospects use themselves. Like, you have to speak their language, and that gets really deep. And what the way to do that is to really insert yourself into their community, find out where they spend their time, not only online, but, in person, and go to those events and make sure that you have a good understanding of how they actually speak to each other. There's no use in referring to a feature or service and using the wrong terminology, because you're already demonstrating you're not an expert and you don't really understand their challenges. So It's so important to do that.
Yeah, agreed. Aside from events, are there anything that you guys may do to kind of keep abreast and on top of like all the industry changes that are happening? Like, for example, do you guys have battle cards or?
Yeah.
All that. Yeah, you guys have that? Okay.
Being a constant learner it's so crucial to sales. And again, more so in the challenging markets. I think for me, especially, what I typically do is I'll subscribe to a lot of different podcasts. I'll find forums, I'll follow lawyers on Twitter, and I'll just kind of see how they communicate with each other, how they communicate with other vendors. And, I'll pass that and distill that information down and pass it on to my team. We have like a nice knowledge deck, basically like a system where they can get in and just kind of see everything. And I'm constantly keeping that updated. And, we're always doing role play and challenge exercises to make sure that what they're saying is resonating. And, speaking about that challenge aspect, I think that's another crucial thing to keep in mind. Like, at the end of the day, if you're selling into a challenging market that doesn't need necessarily, or doesn't understand the need of what you're providing, you have to be able to challenge them. And you have to be able to say, listen, like, I'm never going to be an expert in your business. That's fair. But I am an expert where my business and your business meets. And I can help you understand the things that you're going to be needing to understand if you want to continue to be successful.
Oh, that's a great line right there. I love it. Miles, I know you're quite, I would say, a leader in this area of, I would say, prospecting. So what kind of actionable tips can you kind of add on to what Malcolm just said there?
Yeah. Thanks, Malcolm. I think, Malcolm really nailed it. As you said, I think you've got to approach, no matter what stage you are. So to give you a little more context, Occupy is more in the seed stage. So we're still kind of finding our own bearings, but when you're creating product, it becomes that much more important, right? So I think the first thing that you got to have first, and Malcolm actually spoke to this just now, is you got to read, right? You have to always be learning.
Right.
And that's part of the culture, right, of our own organization as well. It's this always be learning mentality. And there are very simple, ways, in my opinion, where you can, jump right in and start learning, the lingo and learning, what's, keeping these decision makers up at night, right? So I think, you have to read constantly, and you have to sign up for newsletters, right? So go find, the trade publications, go find the newsletters, like Malcolm said, go follow, the right people on Twitter, in social media. And then you got to sign up for the right blogs, and you got to stay on top of everything that's happening, right? So sign up for those newsletters, sign up for those blogs, stay on top of what's happening in the industry. Often, when you go to an event, you got to have something, when you approach someone, right? It's like, it's almost like cold calling, but not, right? Where where today's best practice is to be like a warm caller, right? You have some sort of, tidbit or insight into what's important in the industry. And I think, having that information and staying up to date goes a long way, because you can approach someone, even when you're, fairly new to the business, say, hey, in the maritime world, how about those, shipping rates? They're down, from Asia to the west coast of the United States, right? This trade war is really not helping us out, right? So you can start conversation that way and kind of, lean into it a little bit. As well, right? And you need to seek a deeper understanding, some of and these things will take time, right? So you have to keep that in mind, as well, so I think that's important. And then also, when you start learning about the industry and you start attending conferences, you got to test out your theories, right? Test out your point of view, test out your knowledge even, and try to get the feedback, right? Try to get those heads nodding when you approach them, and that last bullet point, as you see here, right? First talk to the client, right? There's no better way to learn than engaging directly with that prospect client of yours. And hopefully, it's someone that's, maybe a little more understanding, a little more accommodating, maybe, approach someone that's been introduced to you, or someone, in your immediate network, and kind of validate your information and your data that you've learned, from following the industry that way. And then, sync up with your industry peers as well. Sync up with those innovators, the influencers. I always say, when you're reading these blogs and newsletters, try to find the people that are influencing, these media companies and the content, and who's writing regularly.
Exactly.
Often, you can talk to them, you can, show them the product that you built, and get validation also by way of the product, as well. And of course, not everyone is fortunate enough to have them, but, mentors, try to seek some mentorship. It doesn't have to be, one individual. Try to find someone who gets what you're trying to do, who can sort of empathize with you, and loves what you're doing, ideally. And you can learn a lot, and that'll carry you very far in the industry, right?
Exactly.
You've got to have that core understanding, of the industry, the niche, and the market.
Exactly. And the one thing that really stands out with all this is, like, sales reps have to be going the extra mile nowadays to be successful. Like no sales manager in the world is gonna say when the sales team hits the floor at 8 a.m. Hey guys, let's everyone take an hour out of prospecting and cold calling to read some blogs. Okay, let's take an hour out of our prospecting to really get into some textbooks and manuals about what's happening in the law industry. I guarantee you, there's not one sales manager in the world that's going to do that. Malcolm, you can confirm that.
Not during platinum hours, tell you that much.
Oh, hell no.
Not during calling time. But yeah, I mean, look, what I basically did with my team is I gave them all the resources, and then I kind of helped them build the habits of it. So I'm lucky that I have a pretty good team, a really good community. So the culture, I should say, they're willing to do these kinds of things supposedly after hours. But, I think that kind of goes back to, you have to hire correctly and especially if you're in a challenging market, you need to make sure that the people you're bringing on, they're really going to take sales as a lifestyle and not just as a career, right? Like, they're going to look at it. This is a 24-hour thing. I don't ever not work, like I was on vacation recently with my wife. We went to Harry Potter World for her. And I was checking like, it's just how it works, right? Like, there is no such thing as stop. So I think that's so important. But to kind of go off the last thing that Miles was talking about, which I think is great, like having a mentor and finding those influencers, there's actually some tools. I don't know the names offhand, but I can provide Gaetano with it afterwards, where you can actually put in somebody's Twitter and it'll show you all the people they're connected with. And then you can start doing influence maps and really understanding like who are the really important people in the team.
There's a free one called Follower Wonk that is pretty decent that you can check out. There's also a free tool called BuzzSumo that you can check out. Well, there's a free version of it. There's a freemium version of it that you can use to find influencers in your industry on Twitter, also Facebook as well.
Yeah, huge.
And there's some other ones as well. But yeah, I agree.
Some people may be uncomfortable using Facebook as a prospecting tool. I haven't worked up a really good strategy on how to actually prospect in Facebook. In other words, like I'm not sending cold Facebook messages to people. I think that may be crossing a line, but I don't think there's anything wrong with finding somebody's Facebook and seeing what they've liked, seeing the movies they liked, and using that kind of in your pitch.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's important. But the other thing is, Miles was talking about getting in touch with those mentors and those peer groups. Like, at the end of the day, if you approach somebody and you don't want to sell to them, you just genuinely want to learn more about their industry and understand better how you could provide a service to them, I find in my experience, they're way more willing to engage in that type of conversation. And they'll honestly be flattered that you came to them as an expert and you're really looking to get their knowledge from you. So I've, taken out a few lawyers who wouldn't be great clients, but I've taken them out for coffee and just had chats with them, just trying to understand a little bit more, especially the older ones who've kind of seen the development of their industry over time. They can kind of see where it's going essentially. So that's really powerful too. Agreed.
Well, this is great, guys. Tons of actionable insight already. Let's keep it going. I want to get into this next point. So this is a huge pain for salespeople across the world. How do we actually prospect in an industry very, very small, very targeted, and has limited lead sources? Now, I want to also put out another question because I've gotten this question a lot as a marketer, and I got to tell you, when I get this question, my inner nerves they kind of just tighten up, and my insides they cringe. So that question is, hey, are there any lead lists we can buy? Can we buy any? Are there any like lists out there that we can just buy? Like, can we just buy someone's list? and then even worse, it's like, can we buy that list and just like cold email, like with like one like template maybe? Like, can we scale?
Yeah, maybe if it's 2004, right? Like,
yeah, right. So that's exactly what you said. It's a super 2004 tactic. I am not down for any sort of list buying or list purchasing or whatever. There are sources out there that I believe are decently credible, like Zoom Info and Discover.org, where you can get more information about a prospect. But to that end, like, you shouldn't be buying lists. But anyway, let me pass it off to you, Malcolm, to start. How do we actually prospect in a tight industry with very limited lead sources? Like, what are some of the things that you do?
So, one of the things that we've been experimenting with recently, especially when you're in a really insular community, you have to go by your current clients. So what we typically look for is, the buildings, because law firms will usually be in the same building, right? Like in a high rise in Manhattan. So we want to see like, okay, if we've got a client on floor 5, who's in the other floors, and let's talk to them first, because that's going to help, because if they're insular, they talk, and users breed users. And especially in a community that's competitive in nature, they want to know what their neighbors are doing. So that's to me is the easiest way. We're lucky because we're in a position that, our clients are attempting to sell their own services to the public. So they advertise pretty regularly. But it is a challenge, because there are going to be certain firms that don't have a website anymore because they're pretty much operating off referrals only. So that's a little bit more difficult. You have to do your due diligence. And I've taken that responsibility kind of on my own. I don't really have my team prospecting in the traditional sense too much. I feel like it's a bandwidth issue for them. So, I do a lot of stuff on Google Maps. I do a lot of stuff. Zoom Info doesn't typically work for us because we're more SMB. So it's a lot of Google Maps. It's cross-referencing to phone books. It's going in our existing database and just cleaning stuff up. A lot of LinkedIn prospecting too. And then at the end of the day, there's no harm in cold calling a number and just vetting the information. I still pick up the phone. I try to make as many calls as I can and just verify, hey, are you guys still in business? Are you guys still doing this area of law? Like, has this person still at the firm? There's nothing wrong with that. Every now and then people question why you're calling and asking this stuff, but for the most part, people are fine just, giving up that information. You'd be surprised what you can get just by asking.
Right.
So that's the biggest thing. There's no real secret, I suppose. It's just maybe some managers or some people are just a little bit afraid of rolling up their sleeves and just getting into the dirt a bit. But that's what you have to do, especially if you're in an industry that doesn't have millions and upon millions of possible leads that you can go after. You got to work with what you've got. But at the same time, what you have to understand is you can't practice on them. If you have a limited amount, you got to know what you're doing. So this goes back to just making sure your messaging is on point, understanding the relevance of what you're actually communicating, the content's good, because you don't want to practice. You don't want to come back 8, 9, 10 times the same person with the same broken message and expect change to happen. It's just not going to.
Right. Absolutely. I love it, man. So many good tips. Miles, what do you have to layer on top of that, man?
Oh man, there's so much, for Octopi, in maritime shipping and logistics, in a very niche industry, there really isn't that many tools, right? There's no Zoom info, there's no Discover org, for maritime, you're not going to find them on LinkedIn, like you said. And I actually think this probably falls, even more into your own wheelhouse, Gaetano, in terms of demand generation, right? So me personally, I think it falls under business development. You probably know better than me, but I think that this kind of may classify as, old school business development, where, attending the trade shows, right? Going to conferences, shaking hands, and talking to people still is going to be the best way to generate leads. At Octopi, our goal, right? And it really takes your approach. It's going to vary depending on, are you funded? Are you not funded? How big you are you bootstrapping or are you not? But at Octopi, we want the primary drivers of our own growth to be our existing customers. We want it to be word of mouth and success. And even before you get there, though, you do have to go to these events and you got to go up to the speakers and who you think your ideal customer buyers are. And then you got to, follow the prospect, is what I like to say, right? And find out where these people are going, right? That you need to sell to, where are they going every year, every quarter, and in the sales process, don't be afraid to ask them as well, in Malcolm's world, what is the must attend event, for law practice, in this region, or, what is the best, shipping association, to join that's going to help you, find more buyers and to get in front of them and to shake hands with them, where they can kind of overcome a lot of the distrust that generally, exists. And then also you got to exercise your thought leadership, right? And I know it can be a terrible buzzword, in some sense. But to me, I think it's very important that you not only go to these events, but you also try to get a speaking gig at these particular events, especially at an early stage. In that sense, you can exercise influence and you can sort of, command, almost command the direction that, your industry may take, right? If your product is really going to revolutionize their business, you need to be able to dictate that and spread the word, to the masses, right? So instead of just, having these organizers, drop in your inbox, ask you to pay, in our industry, $3,000, for a booth or something like that. Instead, talk about a presentation that you can do for them, right? My CEO, his first presentation, was a huge conference, and he wrote, how would Google manage a container terminal? And generally, you can even catch the eye, or especially in niche industries, of organizers who are used to seeing the same old, presentations, from Windows 2000, just someone reading, a list, not really telling a story, and often, when you can present your case, right, present a sample deck, or maybe you've spoken at another event in the past, you can use that. You can show them and say, hey, listen, I think it'd be a great idea for us to speak, and maybe you should give me some free tickets, right? So that has worked for us, and fortunately for Octopi, my CEO is able to get in front of a lot of really powerful buyers, and decision makers, and that helps.
Awesome. That's great. There's just, this is action packed, and we're about halfway through, so I want to keep it moving forward.
Sure.
Moving on to the next sort of section of this is a very, very, very important question that I think also a lot of sellers struggle with. And it's, what is the best way to help this niche buyer sort of uncover their business needs? Malcolm, I'm going to hand that off to you, my brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, for us, it's pretty interesting because we're, again, dealing with an industry where they're more professional services. So similar to doctors, my dad's a physician, so I kind of spoke with him about this same kind of mentality where, they don't typically consider themselves to be business people, at least not on the smaller spectrum. They kind of feel like they're above it in a sense because they're providing a professional service. So it's reminding them of the very granular black and white accounting and, costs and expense kind of side of the things. But it's being able to understand, again, that intersection between where your service is going to help their business and then being able to communicate that back to them. So a lot of the times it requires multi-touch. You can't give up. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you're probably not going to get them to have that realization moment on that first touch, because for the most part, especially in my industry, there's no external pressure to change. And what I've realized with tech, with medicine, certain industries, like, things change on their own organically, but the law typically doesn't. It does change, but it takes a little bit of time, and it only really changes as an industry when they want it to. So, we've had experiences with people who are essentially practicing the same as they have been since the 80s, and there's really no reason to change because it's working well.
Right.
It's honing in on the ones who are more open to change in the beginning, understanding why, they would change. What are some of the things that are driving them crazy they wish they could fix? And then it's highlighting that. And then it's demonstrating the compassion, right? Like, you can't come across as a person who's just looking to make a sale. It's
Right.
so crucial to get away from. You can't vendorize yourself or commoditize yourself. You have to be a trusted consultant. And you have to, really approach it in a consultative manner and understand, like, you have to work them through that whole change process, because if they're willing to give you their trust that the change is going to be beneficial, then you've got to extend that trust back and make sure that they understand that you're going to help them every step of the way. And, a lot of that comes to different aspects of the business that you're in, making sure that other departments are facilitating their end of it. But, I'm lucky that I work in a wonderful organization that has really, really quality client success and installations. And, from start to finish, we're delivering a white glove experience. And my job is to make sure that my team is communicating that and making sure that it's resonating. So that's the main thing. And you can leverage case studies, and you can definitely leverage testimonials. But to me, what works the best is that story-based selling. People want to hear the real, true-to-life experiences that people have had. And I give a great example. We had a firm that requested a demonstration, and when we got the call in, what turned out happened was they were in court. Their adversary in court was using our platform, and they ended up not doing so well because they didn't have the access to it. So they were immediately blown away by it. But that doesn't happen it doesn't always happen. But now I can use that story. I can say, hey, listen, there was in a situation, and then I go into it and explain it, and that resonates. They've been in situations like that. I'm sure the first time somebody pulled out a laptop in a courtroom, it would blew everybody's minds. It's a similar idea. You want to hone in on that and really get that story to resonate. It's so important.
Yeah, that's huge. It's one of the biggest challenges you guys face. It's not like you're selling sneakers here. Like, at the end of the day, if I go and buy basketball sneakers, it's because somebody hit me up and said, yo, G, let's go play basketball this weekend. And then I look in my closet and I'm like, oh, I already have basketball sneakers, but they're like old. Maybe there's a hole in it. So something happened that caused me to realize, oh, I need basketball sneakers, right? Whereas with like you guys, it's like no one wakes up in the morning and says, maybe I need to overhaul my my maritime shipping and logistics solutions. I don't know. There's really I'm not liking the way that the software is working today, and I think it could be better tomorrow. So, Miles, what do you have to layer on top of that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with you guys. And that is the burning platform, right? The burning platform was a term coined by Mark Suster, actually, a well-known VC, on his blog, Both Sides of the Table. So I'll make sure, to share that link as well. I think that's going to deliver a lot of value to the audience today. But that example is like a prime, the shoe example is just prime, right? Basically, it means that you've essentially got to take something that has been archaic, that has been the same, for the last 30, and in our case, the last 30 or 40 years, and change perspectives in a way where they're like, oh, shoot, I do need new shoes. Oh, wait, I do need a new port terminal operating system, which is what we do. Because the reality was, and we continue to kind of exercise our thought leadership today, is that, the future of all software is SaaS, and the majority of our industry is still operating on pen and paper and Excel. So what you have to do is you got to build trust, like Malcolm was talking about. You got to build trust, which is going to take time. It's going to take a lot of conversations. You got to, establish, rapport first. You got to establish credibility second, and then trust is the ultimate sort of consultative relationship where you ideally are going to be closing, that particular customer, right? You need the case studies and the white papers, like Malcolm said. You need to be able to tell those stories, in a way where it's still going to be very relevant, and hopefully, your ideal customer profile can be still very focused, where these stories are going to resonate, across your market. And then eventually, when you do have that trust, you can start exercising a lot of the challenger sale mentality that we're starting to hear a lot about. And usually you want to, have some level of expertise. You usually want to have closed a couple of clients. You usually want to see some level of success. So that way, when you're speaking to that next prospect, you can actually question them and question the way that they've been doing business in a very methodical way. And then, just simply using the same sort of circumstances that you've learned from your past clients to help push change forward and to create that burning platform and ultimately demonstrating value.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think the one thing you had mentioned is being able to challenge them a bit. One of the things I have my team say a lot on the phones is like, again, just going back to that, we're not experts in your business, but where we meet, we are. Our account executives, essentially, they're in dozens of law firms every single month. They know what works. I would venture a guess that they could probably run a successful law practice not even knowing anything about the law, just from a management standpoint, because they just get it. They've seen good firms, they've seen bad firms, they've seen, papers all over the place, no real filing system, and they've seen firms that are immaculate. And of course, we offer value for all of them across that spectrum, but it's being able to have the comfort in your own knowledge that if you walk into a situation where there's a disaster, you don't want to be insulting, obviously, but you have to be able to say, listen, I know that this is wrong and I need you to understand why it's wrong, but you have to do that in a delicate way. And then of course you've got to be able to have that expertise to bring them through that whole journey with you, right? Like, listen, the way you're doing things is incorrect. However, let me show you some of the ways. And then what you end up with is a situation where even if they never became your client, you can still deliver value to them. And that's important to say in the onset. Like, listen, meeting with me is not going to be a waste of your time. At the end of the day, even if it doesn't make sense for us to move forward with a relationship, at least you walk away with some powerful ideas you can turn right back into your business and immediately improve. And I got that actually from Anthony Aranio. I thought that was such a brilliant point he made, at Outbound this year. And I've been running with that wild, and I think it's getting a great result for us.
Yeah, that's huge, man. It's like, the other thing too I'm thinking about is like, how do you guys, and this is just a little side tangent before we move on to the next point, but like when you're onboarding and ramping new reps, this is crucial, because like if you're going to get on the phone with a lawyer who has probably 20, like most of these guys are they've got 20 plus years of experience, you've got to be able to talk shop, baby. You got to be able to get in there and really talk shop, and they don't have a lot of patience. So like within like probably I would say 15 seconds, you have to convince them of why they should keep talking to you.
Yeah.
So how do you and I know in the maritime shipping and logistics world, it's probably no different. So how do you approach kind of ramping and onboarding of new reps, and how do you sort of gauge their readiness to get in the trenches and just start fighting?
For me, it's just document everything. I'm very big now because my mentor here has really helped me kind of figure this out from a management perspective, but I systematize and process everything. So if there's ever a question that comes up a lot during ramp, I have an article about it. I took this tip from you, actually, Gaetano. I started making training videos because I think that's powerful. So now, even the basic stuff like how to use Salesforce, I got a video on it. But even going further, leverage the expertise in your own organization. So we have a really great transitions team that has just a wealth of knowledge of different competitor platforms and, different things that the law firms themselves are going to be interested in. So I conducted a whole 2-day intense training session, and we went through almost everything. We have some ex-attorneys on staff who are able to give some of their insights, and I just recorded all those videos. I've got them in like a content library, essentially. I go through on our sales acceleration platform. I'll look for really good calls that, overcome specific objections, and I'll highlight those, put them into our call library. So it's just establishing that database and that wealth of knowledge, and then effectively making sure that your team is going through it and retaining it. So during our one-on-ones, especially early on during their ramp, I'm always checking in, seeing, benchmarking against people who are doing it well. Where are you missing? Where are the gaps? And then making sure that knowledge is is being retained.
Textbook, baby. That's sales enablement. Textbook right there. Miles, anything to layer onto that before we move on to the next point?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Gaetano. I think it's incredibly important. Even at an early stage, everything should be in Google Docs, right? Every service level agreement, every sales service level agreement, I should say, your protocols, your pitch frameworks, your objection documents, right? Your battle cards, all these things should be in your Google Docs from the start. It should be a living, breathing document that evolves and improves over time, based on what you hear back from your conversations. And I think it's incredibly important to do that. And I think that's the first step in order to truly understanding what that prospective client is going to need and what their challenges are going to be, because you're eventually going to start hearing a lot of the same things during the sales process over and over again. And you need to be able to come with the right tactics and the right, customer journey material, in order to help get them over the hump and to move them in the process further.
Exactly. Awesome. All right, guys, let's keep it going forward. And by the way, for all the attendees, you are going to get the deck as well as the recording, the replay of this webinar. So don't feel like you're going to miss anything if you got to jump out at some point, but you're going to get a follow-up at the end of this webinar shortly. So don't worry if you feel like you're going to miss anything. By the way, to the audience right now, if you have any questions for the guys, feel free to use the Q&A function within Zoom, and automatically someone just dropped something in there. So let's see what it says. Looks like it's frozen right now, so I'll take a look at it later. Anyway, let's get back to that. So if you do have a question, feel free to use the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will get to your questions as best as we can. But for now, let's keep it moving forward. So the next part of this is really getting into really some objection handling, and it's about how do you kind of navigate around when your prospects are having severe doubts about you or your product. Maybe it's they don't understand what your product does, what the value of it is. Maybe they just don't really care about you because they don't know who you are. So I'm going to pass this over to, let's see, how about Miles to start us off? Helping the niche buyer overcome these changes. So what's the deal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this ties directly also back to point 3 about uncovering the value of your solution. And again, this is going to take some time, right? So don't be, worried if you don't nail this on the first try. Just log everything, take copious notes and keep all those in Google Docs and, tie those back into the CRM and make sure you're taking all the data, if you will, in your sales process, when these objections kind of come up, right? So the first piece that we kind of spoke about already is to really kind of know the customer's business, right? Understand, what their motivations are, understand what their own risks are, and also anticipate what they're going to be asking you for and where they're going to get stopped along the process, right? So as you have more conversations with your ideal customer buyer, you'll start seeing, commonalities emerge, with those objections and overcome them, right? And not only overcome them, but get ahead of them. And you see in point 2 there, make them nod in agreement. And what I mean by that is that, before that they question you on the validity of your solution, or they ask you, who are you? And like, why are you, messaging me, and why are you cold calling me right now? Or why are you warm calling me? What's going on here? And you need to be able to understand, what they're going to ask. And in my case, I quickly, name drop, some of our bigger clients, because that just generates credibility, and depending on your niche industry, it's going to be more important in some cases, for us in maritime, it's really more about, where are you right now? How many clients do you have? Who do you know, that referred you? And those are important, for us. Right. And I think that's sort of the first step. And like I was saying, when you're going through the sales process, you will see those commonalities emerge, and then start building documentation for it. Right. You don't need an entire marketing department. You don't need an entire team in order to start putting together some very basic brochures. Reach out to one of your friends, right, or use Upwork, or any pretty much, contractor website, right? That's going to help you put together these documentations. Don't think that you have to, that's, oh my gosh, it's too much. We don't have brochures. We don't have this. We don't have that. It's actually very easy to kind of come up with, one-page document, right? Where if I'm reaching out to someone for the first time, or I get introduced to someone, we'll even send like a one-page PDF that's like we call it a company snapshot, where, we have it in affordable format. We have quick bullet points on, who we are, what we're doing, where we're at, the types of functionalities that we cover, and where you add value, to their business. And that's sort of like the first step, to kind of get our foot in the door. And again, leveraging that social proof, using those referrals, using those testimonials to help get buy-in, right? If you're huge on LinkedIn, in maritime, even though not everyone is on LinkedIn, you will find the more influential people on LinkedIn. And, and it's kind of similar also to the example, that we spoke about in terms of following your followers, right? Where you're kind of seeing, who they're talking to, who they're interacting with, who's important, in those influencers' point of view, and reach out to them. Don't be afraid to reach out to them directly with intentionality and say, hey, listen, we're doing something new. We're trying to change the game up, in the terminal operating system world, in our case. And I think it might be interesting for you to take a look at. Would love to get your opinion and feedback, and being very open about it, helps a lot. And then also, using your existing customer base, if you have it, and connecting them often helps as well. That's helped Occupy tremendously.
I love it, man. We have some questions. I want to get into this one. This is one that I think maybe Malcolm, you can take a stab at.
Sure.
It says, we sell into high educational institutes where status quo and lengthy sales cycles are the norm yet challenging. My prospects are not open to changes at all. What are your thoughts? So kind of something we've been beating to death a little bit on this particular webinar, but maybe if you have one or two takeaways that you can lend as a point of advice, like if this person is prospecting into education and they're just not really open to changes, like what are some things you can do?
Yeah, what I would do, just not knowing a ton about that industry, but just kind of the way I would think about it, the first thing you want to ask, them or yourself, maybe if you can work through the answer. I mean, to say that they're not open to change, that may be true right now, but it probably hasn't been true forever, right? So the last time they did change, what was true? The last time they had a motivation to make a change to their internal workings or their internal systems, what prompted that? Was it new legislation? Was it something external? Was it an internal thing? Was it a staffing thing? So uncover that aspect, and then you can work with that. It may be that the current administration at that school is just not going to change anything. So now if there's a change there, okay, this is an opportunity for us. Or it may be that the last time they changed, there was an issue, and if you can uncover that, then you can address that issue directly. So it's really, in game theory, they talk about this thing called backwards induction. And I think that's so powerful with any problem solving. So start at the end result is them changing. Great. Work backwards from that. Why would they be afraid of change? Like something must have happened. And the inverse of that is, look for opportunities when things do happen that you can now come back into it. So an example from my world is, a lot of people here are anti-cloud for whatever reason. And I think kind of tying this back into how you overcome the fear of change, like, you empathize with that and you say, thanks for that feedback. Can you share with me why you feel that way? And just let them talk. But then a situation may take place where, they're very hardcore. They've got their server. They're not interested in cloud. But then there's a fire down the street and a law firm down the street loses everything. And they lost their server and they weren't backing it up. And great. This is not great, but this is an opportunity now where I can sort of leverage that and paint that picture and say, well, what would you do in this situation? So how would you handle this challenge? Well, if you haven't thought about that, this is a good reason that we're talking, right? So it's being able to be a little bit creative, thinking outside the box and not looking at things super linear. Like sometimes you have to be willing to kind of go backwards and understand, well, why is it that they're so afraid of change? There's got to be a reason. And I refuse to believe that no one's ever going to change ever. That doesn't even make sense. Of course,
yeah.
Change, right? Like my dad used to register for classes with punch cards and now you do it all online. So obviously things do change. Right? Like online classes are huge now. So that's changed too. Textbooks aren't even physical anymore. There's so many elements of change in that industry. So you've got to look for situations where things have changed and then ask why. And again, so good to ask questions. I would recommend everybody go out and get Jeb's Blunt new book on objections because he goes into this in some detail. But asking questions, that's our bread and butter as salespeople. That's what we should be doing all the time. Just keep asking questions. And if you're not satisfied with those answers, ask the question in a better way. Or maybe the reality is they're not going to be the best fit for you. And you don't want to try to put a round peg into a square hole. It's just never going to work. And what you're going to end up doing is poisoning the well. And then if you're not properly disqualifying just as often as you are qualifying, you're not going to be able to leverage all of your current clients because they're not going to be happy.
Yeah. So Malcolm, it's pretty clear that you don't do this often. Good stuff, guys. All right. So you're welcome. That person said great answer. Okay. So we got about 12 minutes to go. Let's get into like the final points. And then there's a lot more questions. So we'll try to get to all of them before we have a hard stop at 3. But I think this is one of the most important points of the webinar. How do I get the skeptical buyer to trust me in a world where sales doesn't have a strong reputation, right? Oh, this is just some sleazy sales guy who just wants to sell me some BS solution, and it's probably not even going to benefit me. He's just trying to meet quota. It's end of the month, so he's called me 5 times in the past week because he's got to squeeze me in before the deadline hits. So, how do you get around that mentality with prospects, overcoming the distrust in a world where sales has notoriously been not consultative, not buyer focused, all me focused? Oh, I got to hit my number. I got to hit my quota. I have to hit my revenue goals. I have to make my manager look good. I have to look good. Who cares about prospect? They just need to buy. They need to buy now. So how do you get around all that?
You want me to start or?
Yeah, let's go to Miles.
Sure. So I think, this kind of builds on everything that we've been speaking about. So you got the social proofs, you're following all the industry, you're learning everything that you possibly can, you're learning the objections, you're building the customer journey material. And I think for me, the most important piece here is really, EQ, right? I think in my career, EQ is starting to, kind of manifest itself, right? And the first thing, right? Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, amazing book as well. And the reality is, they don't have to buy from you. The Glenn Ross days are over, right? And I know there's some debate right now still about, always be closing. I prefer the term, always be helping. Of course, you want to close the deal, but really, with the amount of information that's available, they can talk to your customers, they can do research. You really need to be able to just kind of guide them right along the customer journey and create the case for them. And one of the ways that's helped us, right, at a very early stage is to really be honest with the buyer. Even though we've got an amazing solution and I think we're the best product, that's out there on the market, I don't jump in saying, hey, we're the best, our competitors are garbage, we're thinking about the future. We don't use that pitch, really. Unless someone forces us to, or they request it, specifically, we don't go in with that mentality. Instead, we tell them, very early on, even in our outbound campaigns, hey, we're a young, maritime innovation company. You're based in Miami. We got 7 clients right now. We're building our solution, actively, with our first 10 clients. Would love to show you what we're working on, how we're changing the terminal operating system world, and would love to get your feedback on the system, right? And don't worry, we're not a sales organization, a super hardcore, you better buy now type of sales organization. I actually will tell people that, when I meet with them, because I know that guard is up. So explicitly telling them, being transparent with them and showing them that, hey, we're not like all the other, sales professionals that are out there, and telling them, hey, you want to build a relationship as well, especially, in maritime. It's really, like I said, it's really about, who and the quality of your product, as well. So hopefully, you got the best product that's out there on the market. But when you talk about, your vulnerabilities, you talk about where you are at currently in the stage that you want to get their feedback, that if it's not a right fit for you, don't worry, I'd love to just stay in touch and get your feedback. When you operate this way, you're actually breaking a lot of the industry norms, right? So our competitors are, they generally tend to be, the kind of, hey, buy from us right now because we're the biggest player in the market. That's not how we operate. And I think that's a very powerful differentiator. And usually people who are in the industry, they kind of know this about the competition already. So this is even a differentiator, in my opinion, that has helped us tremendously, again, along the way.
I love it. Malcolm, anything to layer on top of that?
Oh man, Miles nailed that. I think what I would say is, because my team and I don't have a real good expertise at this stage in actually closing the deals. We just obviously set up the meetings. But from what I remember and what I think to be true, as long as your fundamentals are there as a salesperson, you've got a really healthy pipeline and you're doing what you need to do to keep that pipeline in check. You shouldn't have to force anybody into anything. If you're doing your job appropriately, the only deals you should be closing are the deals that need to close, right? Like, you don't want to put pressure on somebody to close on your timeline. You should be setting everything up so that deals are closing on their timeline and you're also hitting quota. That's the responsibility you have as a professional salesperson. You can't assume that someone's going to buy this month because you need to, or because they showed, or because you've got a good promo on. If you're doing your job appropriately, in my opinion, that should always be the case. You should always have enough going on. Just do the math. If you need 8 deals a month and it takes X number of touches to get to 8 deals, then do X number of touches and make sure that you are overachieving that number so that you don't have to stress it. And then the reality is all this stuff comes into play, like the emotional intelligence we were talking about, and body language is huge. If people if they feel that you're desperate, then you're going to get treated like you're desperate. And then that's no good. You want to be very honest, transparent. I don't need you to buy. I would like you to. I think it would help you, but I'm fine if you don't right now. And that's a little bit, obviously salespeople have managers that want them to do what they, hit your numbers, kill your numbers. And the more niche your market is, the more insular it is, the less clients you have in perpetuity. Like, you have to pump the brakes sometimes. Don't force it, because the last thing you want is a chargeback. You don't want it to cancel. You don't want to create that really bad negative feedback about your brand, because the smaller your world is, the more that reverberates.
Exactly. And you want to avoid that buyer's remorse. You did you did a stellar job in the sales process, but you may have pushed the boundaries a little bit to what really, what real solutions that you can deliver just because you really needed to get that sale. And then, come a week later, they churn because you didn't do a good job of communicating. What
that costs you more than that sale. That costs you
big.
So much that you won't even appreciate, right? Like there's no point in doing that.
Exactly. Last question before we close out. This is from Kabir. He says he sells digital product designs, UI, UX solutions, and they charge significantly more than the competition, but that is because they offer a solution that is of significantly higher quality. So his question is, how do I make a more compelling case that the higher cost of their solution is not necessarily an expense, but it's an investment?
It's a great question.
That's a huge question. Now, as a marketing manager that has hired and fired design agencies before, what I will tell you is that getting the prospects who actually see the value already of like, look, it comes down to this phrase, right? Like, you know how the saying goes, good tattoos are not cheap and cheap tattoos are not good. It's the same thing with basically any service that you use in business. So if you can get to the buyers who automatically see the value in high quality design, you don't have to go and break your arms and legs trying to convince them that high quality design is important because of the positive signals that happen when your prospects engage with your brand for the first time, and the easeability of use on your site, and the stickiness of your brand palette and your colors and the way that the logos and brand sort of visual presentation makes them feel, right? There's all these like emotional things that happen when they see certain colors. Like for Sales Hacker, it's blue because blue is like not too assumptive. It's very kind of easygoing and cool of a feel. So we like the blue and white. That's why we kind of brand the webinar decks like that as well. But anyway, I'll pass it to you, Malcolm, and then Miles for some closing remarks. How do you go about positioning expensive products as an investment and not necessarily an expense?
So again, it's being honest with yourself and being reflective. If you believe that your product is more valuable and there's a compelling case for that, ask yourself if that messaging is coming across, right? Like we're in this very similar position. We are a premium product compared to some of the other players in the space. And I think it's so important that everybody's aligned. All of the marketing, all of the sales communication, and even post-sale, everything we need to talk about to highlight that value needs to be consistent. But it also needs to be easy to understand, right? So you need to really look at where you fit in your space, understand what that value is, and then make sure that the way you're communicating it is logical, because there could be aspects of what you believe is huge, but really isn't. So you need to road test that and get that feedback from your clients, because there may be an aspect of your service or your solution that your clients really like, but you're not aware of it because you don't have that feedback built in. You're not constantly communicating with your existing clients to understand if that value is real. Conversely, you might believe that there's something that's extremely valuable, but in practice, really not so much of a big deal. That could be either you're not communicating it well enough and they don't understand how valuable it is, or it's really just not that valuable. So, it's easy to say, oh, we've got a premium product, we're really quality and all this, but it's quite another thing to demonstrate that. And I think, again, it just comes back to being reflective and honest with yourself. And if the messaging is appropriate, and if you really truly are a better investment, that should come across. And if it's not, start at the beginning. Like more than likely, it's not a fault of your market. More than likely, it's a fault of your marketing, right? So That's really where you need to focus on.
Exactly. So we're just about out of time. We have 1 minute left. I'm just going to run through the key takeaways and then let you guys tell the audience where they can find you and connect with you. So key takeaway number 1, internalize that client's business, know what they need before they do. Number 2, go to where your market is, trade shows, conferences, websites, the thought leadership that Miles was talking about before, also extremely valuable. Find out what kind of publications your prospects read and try to be an author on those sites if you can. That's huge. Number 3, know how to explain and justify your product's value to the prospects. Number 4, we're all human. Let's just get away from this robotic style of sales. Let's get into a connection with the buyer on a deeper level. Huge, huge, huge takeaway. And then number 5, operate with integrity and win lifelong clients through trust. Don't be one of those, hey, it's the end of the month, salespeople, I need to hit my number. Please buy from me because I'm reducing my price and I need to do that in order to hit my quota. So, and I don't think that would even work in some of these longer, more complex sales cycles anyway. So without further delay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on this webinar. I would like to pass it off once more to Miles and Malcolm so they can share where you guys can hit them up, how you can connect, all that fun stuff. So Miles, over to you, brother.
Yeah, so I think if you guys ever have any questions, I'm happy to support and offer my insights and things that I've learned over the course of my career. So you can just ping me on LinkedIn. I pretty much accept everyone as long as you personalize the message. Don't send me this token message. Do not do that, and I will ignore you every time. But just personalize it. Say that you caught us on the webinar. You picked up a couple of things, or not, or tell me it sucked. I'm still going to accept you. But LinkedIn is usually the best way to reach out. And also my email is miles, M-I-L-E-S, @cetuslabs, CETUSLABS.com.
Awesome. Malcolm, where can they find you?
Same deal, man. I'm all very, very active on LinkedIn, Malcolm J. Smith. My cell phone number is right in there. Happy to take a cold call, but make sure you're on your A game because I'm either going to entertain your service or I'm going to use you as an example of what not to do. So come prepared. But yeah, I'm happy to connect.
Yeah.
I think, for me in this industry for a short time, I think the relationships I've established with people like Jimmy Chan over at Waggle and Morgan Ingram, it's been so beneficial to me. So I'm happy to pass that along to other people. So please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. With that said, we are concluding today's webinar. So thank you very much. And we will catch you next time. Peace out, everyone. Have a good day.
All right, guys. Thanks.